In the shadowy crossroads of heaven and hell stands an enigmatic figure, Samael, often called the left hand of God. In Jewish mystical lore, Samael is an archangel whose very name means venom of God, and he embodies a perplexing duality. He is described as a heavenly accuser and destroying angel, a being who seduces humans towards sin and carries out divine wrath. Yet, paradoxically, these dark duties serve a higher purpose. In carrying out God's harshest judgments, smiting sinners, tempting the wicked, Samael's actions result in ultimate good, at least from a divine perspective. This has led scholars to dub him the left hand of God, the instrument of divine judgment and severity, as opposed to the merciful right hand. Today we'll explore Samael's origins, his dual nature as both angel and accuser, and how different traditions, from Jewish and Christian texts to Gnostic and occult writings, have portrayed this complex figure. We'll also see how Samael has been associated with Satan and how he compares to other notorious adversaries like Azazel, Mastema, and Belial. Join us as we journey through ancient scriptures and mystical teachings to unravel the story of Samael, the left hand of God. Samael's story begins in the murky corners of Jewish Apocrypha during the Second Temple period. Roughly 500 BCE, though he is absent from the canonical Hebrew Bible, his name appears in mystical and apocalyptic texts that greatly influenced later demonology. One of the earliest references is in the Book of Enoch, a Jewish apocryphal work. There Samael is listed among the fallen watcher angels who descended from heaven to mate with human women. Unlike the chief watcher, Samael is a secondary figure in Enoch's tale, but his presence establishes him early on as a rebel angel operating on the fringes of accepted law. Other apocryphal writings soon fleshed out Samael's role in humanity's fall. In the Greek apocalypse of Baruch, for example, Samael is cast as the dominant evil figure behind Eden's first transgression. One legend says Samael planted the tree of knowledge in Eden, or a vine that would yield the forbidden fruit against God's order. For this act of defiance he was banished and cursed, effectively becoming a Satan-like figure. To take revenge on God's new creations, Samael then tempted Adam and Eve. Riding on the back of the serpent, like a camel, he enticed Eve to eat the forbidden fruit. In this story, it is not the serpent itself, but Samael, using the serpent as his vehicle of seduction. His vivid image, the archangel of poison, astride a snake, is one of the earliest depictions of Samael as the instigator of human sin. Around the same era, early Christian Apocrypha also spoke of Samael. The Ascension of Isaiah uses the names Samael and Beliar side by side as aliases for Satan. In one passage, Samael is said to have possessed King Manasseh of Judah, leading him to execute the prophet Isaiah. Another passage attributes the very same deed to Beliar, indicating that the text treats Samael and Belial as one and the same, both names for the chief adversary of God. This conflation suggests that by the early centuries CE, Samael was already being identified with the figure of Satan in some circles, a trend that would continue in later Christian demonology. Indeed, other pseudepigraphal Christian works explicitly use Samael as a name for Satan, emphasizing his role in bringing spiritual blindness to humanity. These early mystical and apocryphal accounts set the stage for Samael's persona, a heavenly being who rebels against God's plan, tempts humankind, and incurs a curse, a prototype of the devil. But within Judaism, Samael's character would evolve in a unique direction. To understand that, we turn to the classical Talmudic and Midrashic traditions, where Samael takes on new dimensions. Samael in Talmudic and Midrashic tradition. In the Talmud and Midrash, the foundational commentaries of Jewish tradition, Samael appears not as a mythic rebel outside God's control, but rather as a fearsome agent within the divine order. Early rabbis portrayed Samael as a member of the heavenly court, often with the role of prosecutor or tempter. In these tales, he is not entirely evil. He is performing a necessary function in service of God's justice. One Midrashic legend imagines a dramatic courtroom in heaven, whenever the fate of Israel hangs in the balance. Exodus Rabbah describes Samael standing as the accuser of Israel's sins in the celestial tribunal, while the archangel Michael defends Israel's virtue. Here Samael essentially acts as the Satan. In Hebrew, ha-Satan means the accuser, but note the nuance. Satan is his job title, whereas Samael is his personal name. This distinction is crucial. In early Jewish thought, Satan was not a unique proper name, but a role that various angels could play. Samael, in this telling, is the angel fulfilling that prosecutorial role. The Midrash even recounts a moment where Samael comes to claim the soul of Moses at the end of the prophet's life, acting as the angel of death, only to be rebuffed by God's command. Such stories cement Samael's image as an executor of divine judgment, eagerly accusing and even slaying, but only within the limits God allows. Over time, later Midrashim fused Samael more explicitly with the concept of Satan. By the 5th-6th century, Samael was frequently being called the head of the Satans, essentially the chief of evil spirits. The Midrash Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer gives an extensive account of Samael's deeds. It credits Samael with opposing the creation of Adam, arguing to God that humans would be flawed. After losing that argument, Samael becomes the great tempter. He descends to Eden, riding on the serpent, to seduce Eve, a scene that mirrors the earlier Apocalypse of Baruch version. This Midrash goes even further, claiming that Samael fathered Cain with Eve, implying the first murderer was literally begotten by Satan's angelic chief. Such a lurid detail highlights how fully Samael had come to personify the forces of corruption in later Jewish imagination. Midrashic lore also weaves Samael into many pivotal moments of the Bible. Some sages taught that it was Samael who wrestled with Jacob through the night, appearing as the mysterious angel in Genesis chapter 32. In this reading, Jacob's struggle is a spiritual one against the guardian angel of his wicked brother Esau, and indeed Samael was believed to be Esau's guardian angel, the patron of Israel's enemies. Other stories identify Samael as the cunning angel who tested Abraham, commanding him to sacrifice Isaac in order to later accuse him. He is even said to have tried to stop the Exodus. Some Midrashim imagine Samael at the Red Sea, attempting to thwart the Israelites until God intervenes. In all these tales, Samael operates as a cosmic adversary assigned by heaven to challenge the faithful. He is formidable, even deadly, yet ultimately obedient to God's will. As one late Midrash puts it, Samael the wicked may be prince of the demons, but he remains one of God's servants in the end. It's worth noting that, in early rabbinic literature, Samael was not explicitly equated with the devil as in Christian tradition. There was a reluctance to personify absolute evil outside of God's control. Only in later texts did Jews begin referring to Samael interchangeably as Satan. For instance, Deuteronomy Rabbah finally labels him Samael the wicked, head of all the devils, merging the once separate concepts of Samael and Satan. This shift shows the influence of popular demonology on Jewish thought. By the Middle Ages, the average Jew likely thought of Samael simply as the Jewish name of Satan. But within scholarly tradition, the older understanding persisted. Samael was a unique angel, the dark accuser and executioner in the service of the Almighty. Angel of death and divine wrath, the left hand of God. Throughout these traditions, a clear picture emerges of Samael's dual nature. He is at once feared as a demonic adversary and yet respected as an angelic enforcer of heaven's will. This paradox, an angel who does terrible things, is often explained by viewing Samael as the personification of God's judgment or wrath. In other words, he is the left hand of God. Just as the right hand symbolizes God's mercy and goodness, the left hand symbolizes God's strict justice and punishment. Samael operates precisely on that left side of the divine spectrum. Jewish mystics explicitly describe Samael in these terms. In Kabbalah, he is called the severity of God, the embodiment of the Sephirah of Gevurah, which means strength or judgment. One Kabbalistic text lists Samael among the highest angels, but assigns him the portion of divine judgment. Among Samael's portions are Esau and the nation that lives by the sword, the goats and the Sekirim, and the legions of destroying angels. In other words, Samael's domain is everything that relates to violence, severity, and sin, all under God's ultimate sovereignty. Little wonder that in later lore, Samael became known as the Angel of Death. Many sources identify him as the chief reaper of souls, the one who dispatched the firstborn of Egypt on Passover night, who sought Moses' soul and who continues to take the soul away from man at the appointed time. If life and mercy flow from God's right hand, then death and judgment surely flow from his left, from Samael. Yet, crucially, Samael's deadly work is not seen as independent evil in these traditions. He is sometimes compared to a destroying poison that ultimately heals. A Talmudic comment notes that although many of Samael's functions resemble the Christian Satan, he is not necessarily evil, since his actions result in good, such as destroying sinners. This startling line reminds us that in a theological context, Samael's trials and punishments serve a purpose: to uphold divine law, to purify, or to chastise. In a sense, he is God's surgeon, excising spiritual corruption through harsh means. This concept is dramatically illustrated in the ancient Yom Kippur ritual. On the Day of Atonement, Israel would send a goat for Azazel into the wilderness, essentially a bribe to the forces of evil to leave Israel alone. Later Jewish explanation equated Azazel with Samael. On Yom Kippur, they said, the scapegoat appeases Samael so that he cannot accuse Israel for its sins for 1 year. Here we see Samael integrated into the divine plan of mercy. The left hand is acknowledged and symbolically paid off so that the right hand of God's mercy may operate without obstruction. It's a ritualistic nod. Even the accuser has his due in the cosmic order. Thus, Samael's dual identity, angelic yet demonic, reflects an underlying theological idea that what we perceive as evil or punishment may in fact be an extension of God's justice. Samael is dark because he carries the weight of divine anger. He is evil from the human perspective, yet in the grand scheme he executes a necessary duty. This ambiguity makes him a fascinating subject in religious studies. He blurs the line between God's will and devilish malice, challenging us to consider how closely judgment and evil can resemble one another when viewed from different angles. It's no surprise, then, that discussions of Samael often lead directly into comparisons with Satan, the ultimate accuser, and debates about whether Samael is Satan or something distinct. Let's delve into how Samael and Satan became entwined in various traditions and where they still diverge. Samael and Satan, one being or two. Samael's association with Satan is one of the most intriguing aspects of his lore. Are Samael and Satan simply two names for the same cosmic villain, or are they different entities? The answer varies across time and tradition. In the Hebrew Bible, the Satan is a title, not a personal name. It refers to any accuser or adversary. The Book of Job famously depicts a heavenly prosecutor called Satan, who challenges Job's righteousness, but this figure is not given a specific name or backstory. Early Jewish interpreters, as we've seen, identified that prosecutor with Samael in hindsight. They would say, Satan in Job is doing his job as accuser, and that accuser is none other than Samael. In this framework, Samael, Satan in function, though perhaps not yet in full persona. However, as the idea of a singular devil became more defined, particularly under Christian influence, Jewish writers had to clarify Samael's relationship to this devil. By the late Midrashic period, Samael was explicitly called the Prince of all devils, essentially the Jewish name of Satan. For example, in the Midrash Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, Samael is titled the Chief of the Fallen Angels, directly paralleling Christian narratives of Lucifer's fall. There is even a medieval tradition that Samael was the angelic name of Satan before the fall. In other words, Samael became Satan when he rebelled against God. This idea appears in some occult and Kabbalistic texts and seems influenced by the Christian storyline of Lucifer. Yet not all traditions fuse them completely. Some Jewish sources maintain a distinction between Samael and Satan. The Hebrew Book of Enoch presents Samael as a powerful evil figure, greater than all the heavenly princes, but pointedly identifies him as the angelic patron of Rome, not as the only Satan. In that text, he is chief of the demons and tempters, yes, but Satan remains more of a general term, or perhaps a team of accusers. Similarly, the Talmud sometimes speaks of multiple Satans, implying many accusing angels, with Samael being their leader. This suggests that in some rabbinic thought, The Satan is a job description that many can fill, whereas Samael is a specific being with a name, history, and a consistent personality as the top accuser. In Christianity, where Satan is unequivocally the one devil, Samael's name mostly appears in esoteric or apocryphal contexts. Early Christian writers mentioned Jewish sects that used the name Samael for the devil. We saw how the Ascension of Isaiah treats Samael as interchangeable with Belial. Other occult sources, such as the Testament of Solomon, list Samael as a prince of demons, even calling him head of the devils. By the time of the medieval grimoires and demonologies, Samael is often just listed as one of the many names of Satan, or a high-ranking demon in hell. For instance, one occult classification from a later era names Samael as the infernal prince governing the element of fire, a role befitting his fiery, warlike nature. He also appears in Renaissance Christian Kabbalah as the Angel of Mars, essentially a way to include the scary Samael within a Christianized angelic hierarchy. In summary, Jewish tradition tends to view Samael as an aspect or servant of God's justice, while Christian tradition tends to subsume Samael into the broader persona of Satan, the rebel against God. The lines blur in folklore. Even some Jewish tales by the modern era speak of Samael as the name of the devil. Indeed, one finds sayings like Samael, may his name be blotted out, used in Jewish stories similarly to how one would curse Satan. But academically speaking, Samael represents a slightly different concept, the accuser, who is still on heaven's payroll, so to speak, as opposed to Satan, who in Christianity is in outright revolt. Regardless of these nuances, the two figures are closely linked. Both Samael and Satan fill the role of tempter, accuser, and angel of death in various texts. Both are depicted as serpentine or dragon-like in art and vision, and in many languages and literatures, people simply treat Samael as the Hebrew name of Satan. It is only when we dive into mystical or scholarly works that the finer distinctions appear. One scholar of comparative religion summarized it well. Samael defines what it is to be a demon, and yet what it is to serve God, simultaneously. This makes him a unique lens through which to view the broader Satan figure, an insight especially appreciated in Gnostic and occult traditions, to which we turn next. Kabbalistic demonology, Samael as Lilith's consorts. While mainstream Judaism kept Samael on something of a leash, the medieval Kabbalists let him roam into far more devilish territory. Kabbalah, the Jewish mystical tradition flourishing in the late Middle Ages, developed a complex demonology where Samael takes center stage as a truly diabolic character. In these texts, he is not just an angelic prosecutor, he is Prince of Demons. One pivotal Kabbalistic treatise titled The Treatise on the Left Emanation lays out the idea of an alternate realm of evil mirroring the Holy Sephirot. Samael figures prominently here. He and a mysterious female demon named Lilith are said to emanate together as a dark counterpart to Adam and Eve. This was a bold development. Earlier Jewish legend knew Lilith as a female night demon and Samael as an accuser angel, but it was only in this Kabbalistic era that the two were paired as husband and wife. In the Kabbalists' imaginative theology, when Adam and Eve were created, a demonic couple, Samael and Lilith, was likewise brought forth as their shadow. They became the parents of hordes of demonic offspring that plagued the world. One text chillingly notes that their son is called the Sword of Samael, a demonic entity of destruction. The union of Samael and Lilith is said to be so potent and prolific that God had to intervene. A secondary source recounts a legend that God castrated Samael to prevent him and Lilith from producing endless demonic progeny. This colorful piece of lore explains why Lilith is often portrayed as seeking other lovers, because her angelic consort Samael was rendered unable to procreate further. It's a fantastical story, but symbolically it suggests that even evil's fertility has limits imposed by the divine. In the Zohar, the foundational book of Kabbalah, Samael appears frequently as the leader of the Sitra Achra or other side, the realm of evil. The Zohar even repeats the motif of Samael riding the serpent in Eden, firmly embedding that image into mystical lore. Intriguingly, one passage of the Zohar confounds Samael with Azazel, another infamous fallen angel. It calls Samael by the name Azazel, which some scholars think is a mistaken identification within the text. The confusion between Samael and Azol in Kabbalah illustrates how interchangeable the heads of evil became in later mysticism. Samael, Azol, Satan, Belial, all might be names pointing to the same dark spiritual reality, seen from different angles. Kabbalists also gave Samael elaborate titles and attributes. He is associated with the planet Mars, the color red, and the metal iron, all symbols of war and severity. In some charts of the mystical tree of life, Samael is assigned to the Sephira of Geburah, on the left pillar, exactly opposite Michael, who stands for Hesed, on the right. This positioning again echoes the idea of Samael as the left hand of God. One could imagine Michael, the benevolent protector, as God's right-hand angel, and Samael the avenger as his left-hand angel. In art and literature, this opposition is sometimes explicit. An old tradition holds that Michael is the patron angel of Israel, while Samael is the patron of Rome. In medieval Jewish imagination, especially after suffering under Roman and later Christian persecution, Samael became a symbol of the oppressive foreign powers, literally demonizing the enemies of Israel by equating their guardian angel with the prince of evil. The occult traditions of the Renaissance and modern era, which borrowed freely from Kabbalah, also incorporate Samael as a key figure. He appears in grimoires and magical texts both as a feared demon and as a spirit that could be invoked or controlled. There are anecdotes of learned rabbis using practical Kabbalah to summon or dismiss Samael. One famous tale claims the 18th century mystic Baal Shem Tov managed to summon Samael and bend him to his will. A dangerous feat, if true, essentially compelling the devil to obey you. Whether we take such stories at face value or not, they indicate Samael's prominence in occult circles. He was not just theoretical, he was a presence to be reckoned with in rites and exorcisms. To sum up the Kabbalistic view, Samael is no longer ambiguous. He is the quintessential archdaemon. He still holds a kind of office in heaven, but Kabbalah emphasizes his role as the dark mirror of holiness. With Lilith at his side, Samael personifies the left-hand path, not in the modern sense of heterodox spirituality, but literally the left side of the divine, the side of judgment, fear, and evil. Gnostic perspectives. Samael the blind demiurge. Around the same time that Kabbalists were formulating their demonology in medieval Europe, an entirely different religious movement many centuries earlier, the Gnostics of late antiquity, had already repurposed Samael for their own mythology. Gnosticism was a collection of early mystical sects that radically reinterpreted biblical cosmology. To the Gnostics, the material world was a flawed or even evil creation, and the true God was a distant, unknowable spiritual fullness. The creator of this material world, in their view, was not the true God at all, but a lesser, ignorant deity they called the demiurge. And what name did some Gnostic texts give this false creator god, Samael? In Gnostic scripture unearthed at Nag Hammadi, Egypt, we find that Samael is one of the names of the demiurge, alongside Yaldabaoth and Saklas. In the Gnostic text on the origin of the world, it is explained that Samael is blind, and that his demonic archons are also blind. This blindness is not literal eyesight, but spiritual blindness, ignorance. For Gnostics, ignorance is the essence of evil. Samael the demiurge is evil precisely because he is deluded, thinking himself the highest power when he is not. The Gnostics thus take the Samael of Jewish law, already a figure associated with deception and death, and elevate him to being the false god of this world. In a shocking inversion, they equate Samael with the God of the Old Testament. For Gnostics, the God who created Adam and Eve, who expelled them from Eden, who drowned the world in the flood, that God was Samael, a malicious or at best ignorant being, distinct from the true God of light. This idea conflates the Jewish creator God with the devil, which was heretical to both mainstream Jews and Christians. But it was central to Gnostic myth. The serpent in Eden was actually a hero in their eyes, sent by higher wisdom to free Eve and Adam from Samael's blind tyranny. In some Gnostic accounts, Samael is also called Yaldabaoth and given a grotesque form, the body of a serpent with the face of a lion, symbolizing his bestial, deformed nature. The Gnostic Samael, then, is an even darker twist. He is not serving God at all. He thinks he is God. This is essentially Satan in a metaphysical role. the ultimate cosmic villain who traps souls in matter. Where Jewish Kabbalists saw Samael as the left hand of the god, Gnostics saw him as the false god to be overcome by spiritual enlightenment. Interestingly, both perspectives agree on one thing: Samael is blind. Later Jewish ethics texts sometimes dub him Samael the Blind as well, implying he cannot see the full truth or the goodness in God's creation. In Gnosticism, that blindness is literal. He's called the blind god, to denote his lack of gnosis. It's fascinating that the same name, Samael, sits at the crossroads of these two mystical systems, one using him to explain the existence of evil in a monotheistic universe, the other using him to explain evil in a dualistic universe, both grappling with the age-old question, whence comes evil, and Samael, in both cases, is the answer. Visual, an ancient Gnostic gem with a lion-headed serpent, which some scholars identify with Yaldabaoth/Samael. Comparisons with Azazel, Mastema, and Belial. Each of these names had a meaning. Yaldabaoth was likely understood as child of chaos, Saklas as fool, and Samael famously as blind god, or blind one. The Apocryphon of John describes how the arrogant creator boasted, "I am God and there is no other." In response, the voice of Sophia calls out and mocks him with the name Samael, meaning blind god, because in his ignorance he cannot see the superior divine realms above him. No study of Samael would be complete without comparing him to a few other infamous figures that stalk the same theological shadows. Names like Azazel, Mastema, and Belial appear in scriptures and traditions alongside Samael. How do they differ? Are they just other aliases for the same archetype, or do they have distinct identities? Let's start with Azazel. Azazel is known from the book of Leviticus as the mysterious entity to whom a goat was sent on the Day of Atonement, essentially a demonic being dwelling in the wilderness. Later, in the book of Enoch, Azazel is one of the rebel angels who taught humanity to make weapons and practice sorcery, thus accelerating corruption on earth. In many respects, Azazel overlaps with Samael. Both are blamed for the spread of sin and both get linked to the Eden story. However, Azazel's role is more that of the corrupter and scapegoat. In fact, one tradition says the goat sent to Azazel each year carries Israel's sins to him, so that Azazel cannot accuse Israel in heaven. In later demonology, Azazel is often depicted as a demon of the wilderness and desolation, whereas Samael has a broader portfolio. In Kabbalah, interestingly, some saw Azazel as a facet of Samael. One Lurianic Kabbalah teaching enumerates 4 heads of Samael, essentially 4 aspects of the demonic force, and lists Azazel as the aspect that tempts and seduces humanity, the instigator of sin. In that scheme, Samael is like a supreme evil that includes Azazel within it. So Azazel can be viewed as Samael's seducing face, the one that lures humans to stray. Next, Mastema. Mastema appears primarily in the Book of Jubilees, a Jewish text from around the 2nd century BCE. Mastema is essentially the Satan figure in that retelling of biblical history. He's the one who convinces God to test Abraham by sacrificing Isaac. He unleashes plagues on Egypt, and he harasses the Israelites in the desert. Mastema in Hebrew means enmity or hostility, fitting for an adversary. Jubilees portrays Mastema as commanding a horde of evil spirits, again, very much like a Satan or Samael figure. However, Jubilees intriguingly has Mastema operating with God's permission, even asking God to let him retain some evil spirits after the flood to test humanity. This aligns with the notion of a subordinate accuser rather than a holy rogue devil. In comparison, Samael's profile is broader historically, but Mastema can be seen as the testing aspect of Satan, the one who afflicts and persecutes to prove a point. Think of Job's trials. Lurianic Kabbalah's demonology also includes Mastema as one of the faces of Samael. Mastema is described as the aspect that persecutes and afflicts humanity, literally embodying hostility. So, much like Azazel, Mastema is sometimes subsumed under the larger Samael category. We might say Mastema, the tempter who tests faith through suffering, akin to the Satan in Job, which indeed is how Jubilees uses the term. Finally, Belial. Belial originates as a Hebrew word meaning worthlessness. In the Old Testament, sons of Belial just meant wicked, lawless people. But in the intertestamental period, and definitely by the time of the New Testament, Belial had become a proper name for a high demon, essentially another name for Satan. The Dead Sea Scrolls speak of the lot of Belial versus the lot of God, casting Belial as the leader of the forces of darkness in an end-times war. In the Ascension of Isaiah, we saw Belial/Beliar used as a synonym for Samael and Satan. In Christian demonology, Belial is a demon of lies, guilt, and impurity, one of the crowned princes of hell. So Belial is very much in the same league as Samael, and often the two have been confused or merged. However, some traditions give Belial a slightly different niche, a demon of lawlessness and corruption, not necessarily the one who kills or accuses, but the one who leads people morally astray into depravity. Here again we see a complementary role. In the earlier mentioned Lurianic Kabbalah list, Belial is assigned as the aspect of Samael that corrupts and defiles humanity, essentially the spreading of worthlessness and moral decay. This matches Belial's meaning and usage in texts as the spirit of utter lawlessness. So comparing these figures, Samael is the overarching persona combining many evil roles: accuser, destroyer, angel of death, prince of demons. Azazel is the tempter and carrier of sin, often a part of Samael's operation. Mastema is the persecutor, the one who tests faith by inflicting suffering, again an aspect of the satanic function within Samael's domain. Belial is the corrupter, representing the fostering of wickedness and decadence, the moral antithesis of God, which can be seen as another face of the Samael-Satan archetype. It's as if different traditions took the composite Satan and split his job into multiple characters. In one context, Satan is prosecuting in heaven. In another, he's luring you to sin. In another, he's bringing calamities. And in another, he's the general spirit of immorality. Later thinkers, especially mystics, tended to say, these are all the same force at root. Indeed, one 16th century text explicitly lists Satan, Azazel, Mastema, and Belial as four heads of the evil husk that is Samael. They are unified as one demonic triad, opposing the holy realm. In everyday practice, of course, Jews and Christians didn't usually pass these differences. To a layperson, these names were often just interchangeable labels for the devil or for various demons. But understanding the subtle differences gives us a richer picture of the ancient worldview of evil. Samael sits at the top of this hierarchy, or perhaps encapsulates it, earning titles like Prince of Demons, Prince of Darkness, etc. In many sources, the others, Azazel, Mastema, Belial, can be seen as either lieutenants of Samael or alternative cultural names for the same archetypal enemy. Conclusion. Samael, the so-called left hand of God, is a figure of striking complexity. As we've seen, he originated in Jewish lore as a shadowy archangel who fulfills God's most severe tasks, from accusing souls in heaven to wreaking destruction on earth. In that capacity, he personifies the attribute of divine judgment, a necessary counterbalance to mercy. Yet over centuries, Samael also absorbed humanity's darkest fears and imaginings. He became the serpent in Eden, the executioner of Moses, the consort of the demoness Lilith, the father of monsters, even the false god of this world in Gnostic myth. What makes Samael so fascinating is this dual role as both servant and enemy of God. To the question, is Samael good or evil? The answer is inevitably yes. He is both. In many Jewish texts, he carries out God's will, whereas in many Christian or occult texts, he is the devil in rebellion. Perhaps Samael's story reflects an evolving understanding of evil itself, initially seen as stemming from within God's rule, but gradually viewed as something external to be personified and opposed. Samael stands right at that pivot point, one foot in the heavenly court, one foot in hell. Across different traditions, Samael has been a mirror reflecting each tradition's attitude toward justice, temptation, and the nature of evil. In Judaism, he highlights the idea that even the dark angels serve a purpose in the divine plan. In Christianity, he underscores the notion of a fallen angel who becomes the devil, an adversary to be defeated by divine love. In mysticism and the occult, Samael becomes a symbol of arcane knowledge, representing the left-hand path of power and severity, sometimes even an initiator who must be confronted on the spiritual journey. And what of Samael today? His name may not be common in Sunday sermons or synagogue services, but his legacy endures in our cultural imagination of the Grim Reaper, the devil, the fallen angel. Any time a story shows an angel of death carrying out God's grim work, or a tempter in the shadows claiming authority over the sinful, we hear echoes of Samael. Even modern literature and media drop his name for mysterious villains or anti-heroes, precisely because of the rich tapestry of meaning behind it. In closing, Samael's tale invites us to ponder the thin line between divine justice and demonic cruelty. He challenges us to ask, can an angel do terrible things and still be serving the light? And conversely, can what we call evil inadvertently play a role in a greater good? These questions, raised by the myth of Samael, lead to profound theological and philosophical reflection. Perhaps that is the ultimate gift of Samael. The poison of God can also be a kind of medicine, forcing us to confront the mysteries of morality, free will, and the nature of the divine. Thank you for joining us in this exploration of Samael. This has been a journey through ancient texts and esoteric traditions, and we hope it shed light on an often misunderstood figure. In understanding Samael, we gain insight not only into religious mythology, but into how cultures across time have wrestled with the presence of evil in a world governed by a good God.